Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome everyone to our hearing today. We have a distinguished panel of witnesses here to discuss the important food safety mission at the Food and Drug Administration. For our first panel, I'd like to welcome Dr. Robert Califf, FDA Commissioner. He is joined by Dr. Susan Main and Mr. Frank Yanis and Mr. Michael Rogers. Thank you all for being here this morning. The FDA is charged with the critical mission of protecting America's food supply. Yet, recent reports have highlighted a lack of leadership, poor communication, and slow governance at the agency that have had a detrimental impact on the safety of the food that every American relies upon. This hearing will highlight not only FDA's decision-making with regards to food safety, but also the impact those decisions have on industry and the overall food supply. The question we need to ask today is food safety a priority of the FDA? America has the safest food in all the world, but serious concerns remain about the priority that FDA gives to food safety and the missteps that have led to outbreaks or critical shortages and individuals getting sick. An easy explanation is that FDA does not have the resources or personnel to oversee such a massive industry. There may be some truth to that, but there is more to the story. Since the passage of the Food Safety and Modernization Act, or FSMA, this committee has provided the FDA with hundreds of millions of dollars in increases for food safety. Yet, inspections continue to decline and outbreaks remain. Additional resources are not the only answer, and that's why this hearing is so important. The FDA needs to do better. Lack of communication, outdated ways of thinking, and overall lack of leadership have negatively impacted the agency. And we have seen that with the recent infant formula crises. Since 2002, the FDA has had 7 different commissioners. Over the last 20 years, FDA has gone without a Senate-confirmed commissioner for almost 6 years of that time. That's not acceptable. And there is no way an agency as large as the FDA can be leaderless and not have serious issues. I commend the career employees at the FDA. They have forged ahead even when acting commissioners were in charge. The role of this committee is to provide the agencies we oversee with support and resources that they need. FDA has had so many different and complex responsibilities. I want to assure you, Dr. Califf, that as chair of this subcommittee, I'm committed to providing FDA with what it needs to get the job done. With that, I will reserve the time for the ranking member to give his opening statement when he arrives, and we'll turn to, would either of the, Senator Moran, would you like to make an opening statement?
No, it's not necessary.
Okay.
No, just questions.
Very good. Let us start, let us start with Dr. Califf.
I want to assure you that the safety of our nation's food supply is one of my absolute top priorities. Although foodborne outbreaks continue to occur, all experts with whom I have consulted agree that America's food supply has never been safer than it is today. But as the industry, the environment, and the international landscape change, we must prepare for future challenges. As envisioned in the new era of smarter food safety, a report put together before my arrival, the combination of tech-enabled traceability, smarter tools for prevention and response, new business models, and retail modernization, and a collaborative food safety culture where industry is implementing the preventive framework envisioned by FSMA, paint an exciting picture for the future. The recent acceleration of digital technologies enabling traceability and predictive capabilities, innovation in genomics facilitating outbreak response, and advances in agricultural biotechnology that allow food production to resist the effects of climate change and feed the growing global population bring that vision even closer within reach. Further, food is the foundation of health. Smarter food safety, better nutrition, and ongoing efforts to reduce environmental contaminants and toxins in our food supply are critical for improved health of the whole U.S. population. I anticipate a future in which people have more reliably safe food, more access to variety and certainty about availability. The agricultural ecosystem thrives, and the rest of the world. Groups about the perception organized or supported. In my first 5 months back in the job, I've met with stakeholders and experts to discuss FDA's food program and food policy priorities for the next decade. My assessment is that the foods program is staffed by highly dedicated people. I can't stress enough how hard they work and the depth of their knowledge, but they're working in a suboptimal environment that needs to be reformed. Accordingly, we've initiated a full review of the foods program, including its structure, function, leadership, authorities, and funding. I want to assure you that I intend to communicate about and implement any organizational and strategic changes that will further improve the performance of the agency's foods program. Several key issues must be addressed and will not wait for the results of the full assessment to get started. Hiring and retaining foods program staff has long been a concern. I'm grateful that the user fee reauthorization bills in both chambers recognize the great need to get the right staff on board quickly. Failures of the supply chain throughout the pandemic, and particularly the recent infant formula crisis, have shown the importance of new authorities FDA seeks to anticipate and respond to supply shortages. As the world moves to digitize its information, the foods program must upgrade its technology and modernize its work processes to enable its workforce to be maximally productive, using machine learning and virtual methods to keep up with the vast and rapidly expanding foods ecosystem. Food contamination and recall events will always capture the headlines, but we must balance a food safety plan with work on nutritional science and labeling that enables consumers to make informed dietary choices and facilitates industry reformulation. When FDA added trans fat to the nutrition facts label, intake decreased by 80%. The results of FDA's nutrition work go largely unseen, only becoming evident through generations of health data. Yet turning the tide on diet-related chronic disease is a critical priority for me and for this administration because of the potential to impact the health of every American, dramatically reduce healthcare costs, and close our life expectancy gap. Currently, we live 5 years shorter in the United States than the average of other high-income countries. As we work together to implement needed changes and identify critical gaps in authorities or resources, I'll continue to engage with Congress as we all share the same goals of safer food supply. In conclusion, our food has never been safer, yet challenges remain and we must do better. One food outbreak is one too many. I appreciate your attention to this and look forward to continuing to work with you to ensure the foods program at FDA has the right structure, people, budget, and authority to keep our food supplies safe.
Next, I will call on Mr. Frank Yanis. What? Oh, next I will turn to member questions. I understand that you've provided the opening statement on behalf of all of the witnesses. So
I'm trying to speak for the group here.
Excellent. So, Dr. Califf, we had a discussion on food safety when you were here to testify on the fiscal year 23 budget request. And I wanted to follow up with you. As the Commissioner of FDA, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing the agency with regard to your food safety mission? Every agency, as I mentioned, can use additional resources. That can't be the only solution to the problem. So what changes do you believe need to occur to make food safety a higher priority?
Let me start by just thanking you for bringing up the fact that we have an agency that's had multiple commissioners with very short tenures. I'm getting ready to turn 71. I don't plan to be here forever, but I hope I'm here long enough to get a situation in place that is sustained regardless of who is the commissioner, and that's the number one goal. So when you ask what's most important, I look at the overall situation and just see a rapidly expanding group of industries that are producing food. I don't need to tell anyone today about climate change with the heat that we're seeing and the impact that's going to have, not to mention the war in Ukraine having an enormous impact on nutrition in the world. So we have this increasingly complex, critical set of industries that we need to regulate. And I think we have to look at the whole picture. It's the structure, it's the function, it's the leadership. You've mentioned that resources are not the only issue. I completely agree with that. But I do believe that when we finish our complete top-to-bottom evaluation, we'll be coming to you with specific requests for places where additional resources can make a difference. And I know it's already being discussed and in some of the budget plans, and that's much appreciated. So, I think it's very hard to pick out one or two things. It's a multi-dimensional industry where so much good could be done if we get good nutrition to people in plentiful supply at a time when it's going to be very stressed in the future.
The previous administration undertook some structural changes with the goal of raising the profile of food safety. Dr. Califf, do you believe that these changes were effective or worked?
Well, first of all, let me say I don't question the motives of the previous administration on this regard. I think the right things were said and efforts were made. But, I heard a resounding chorus from the outside world, and, I must say from inside the foods program that it hasn't gotten the priority that it deserved. I think over the last couple of years, I would just point out that the pandemic has had an enormous effect on the whole FDA. And what's gone largely unnoticed is the amazing work that the foods program has done. You remember the early days of the pandemic when you couldn't find anything on the grocery shelves. And, we definitely had a problem with infant formula, but by and large, these people have put in a huge amount of work to be adaptable with regard to regulations and rules to ensure that people had food to eat at a time when there was a question as to whether that would occur. So the short answer is it's not. I think there's consensus in the food world that whatever was done in the past has not been successful in getting the foods program to the priority that it deserves.
I'm sure you're all familiar with a Politico article that was published in April. It quoted several people who agreed that the agency is simply not working in order to advance food safety. Some of the quotes included broken, Byzantine, ridiculous, a joke. I'd ask both Dr. Main and Dr. Califf how you responded to such very strong criticism and how you responded to the article itself.
If I may, could I go first, and then I would like to definitely give Dr. Main the floor. I just want to vigorously rebut the way those comments were made. Mm-hmm. We have the safest food in the world, and every expert I've talked with, the CDC monitors this carefully. Our food is as safe as it's ever been. So to say it's not working is, in my view, just incorrect. That doesn't mean it can't be a lot better and that there aren't major problems. So, that's why we're doing this top-down review and plan to make significant changes. But some of the people quoted in that have been in leadership within the FDA. I could say they had a chance to fix it. It's not so easy to fix. So we all need to work together on this collaboratively, but also there's accountability, so we are going to need to make changes.
Yeah.
Dr. Main?
And thank you for the question, Senator Baldwin. And what I will say is food safety is not a joke at CFSAN. It is our mission within CFSAN, and as Senator Director, I can tell you it is one of my absolute top priorities. That being said, we do take all criticism seriously and are always looking forward to ways that we can continually modernize and improve our work within the center. So that's a priority for us. I will say, reflecting back on the last 10 years, we have accomplished a tremendous amount in the foods program. For example, with food safety, the establishment of whole genome sequencing, which is game-changing globally in food safety, that was work that came out of CFSAN. Also, our work with regard to FSMA implementation, the foundational rules that have come out, 50 guidances to help move industry to the prevention-oriented framework that you all envisioned with FSMA, that is really important and notable progress forward. Also, with regard to nutrition, Dr. Califf highlighted our work on trans fat, but there's much more. Empowering consumers with information, really important things like menu labeling, so consumers have information to make the decisions they need with regard to their personal health. But we know more can be done. Resources are certainly something that was identified in that particular article. I will point out that we are 97% funded by budget authority and not by user fees. So as more work comes in, we absorb that work because we don't have a user fee base to increase our staff along as the work increases. So that I think is relevant, and we look forward to working with you on that. Dr. Califf also mentioned authorities. There are areas that we are seeking new authorities that would make our work more efficient. And so this is the type of work we look forward to working with you on resources and authorities, as well as the outcome of the review that Dr. Califf mentioned to make it the strongest possible foods program.
Thank you. I've exceeded my time already. I'm going to reserve time for a second round, but next I'd call on Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us this morning. You mentioned efficiencies at work just in your concluding sentences. It's my understanding that many of the staff at FDA continue to work from home. And I think it's a reasonable expectation to have our employees back to work in the office, in the laboratories, and across the agency. Is my understanding about the volume of employees that are still absent from the workplace accurate? And what's the plan to return them to the workplace soon?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And I think, there we go. Thanks for the question. And I think it's what you said is partially accurate, but I want to be very explicit here about what I think the facts are. People that have worked in our laboratories have always gone to work throughout the pandemic. If your job required that you be at work, that's happened. Our ORA inspectors, as Mr. Rogers will talk about, there were cutbacks because of the peril of travel and also difficulty often even getting into a facility when there were outbreaks. But our inspectors have put themselves at risk routinely going there. The place where people have had the option of virtual or hybrid work has been those who are dealing with data or administrative functions that really don't require that you're there in person to be most efficient. And I think our productivity is exemplified by the fact that we've carried on all the usual activities plus the pandemic activities. And I think if you talked to most of the industries that we regulate, they're pretty happy with the performance of the FDA. Now, we're in a pilot program now to look at the hybrid environment. In my previous job at Google, I spent a lot of time on this, where we had tremendous resources to do the analysis. And I think all of this is best handled by looking at the particular job, the particular function. And the question is, what's going to lead to the most productive employee who's most satisfied with the work?
So what percentage of the workforce no longer comes to the workplace?
No longer comes, I'd say maybe about half. When you say no longer comes, that's a difficult thing to answer.
No
given the
longer comes
inspector.
on a regular weekly, a regular daily basis.
I'd say the majority are not in the physical location on a regular daily basis. But remember, we have a very large part of the workforce that's out in the field traveling.
Well, I don't want to at all disparage. In fact, I want to compliment those who worked through the pandemic and the risks they took to make certain that their jobs, their responsibilities were fulfilled. I don't believe that you can have and we'll see what your study indicates, but I think it's very difficult to have a team effort in the absence of half of your employees on an ongoing basis. I understand the need to do this for the crisis of COVID, but I'm discouraged by your suggestion that this will be an ongoing method by which the FDA employees work. And it doesn't sound like at the moment there's a timeline a plan to return them to the office. You're awaiting this analysis.
Well, I would say more and more people are returning to work, and as we work out the hybrid into the work environment they've been in, and as we work on the hybrid data, we're going to make decisions as we go as to what's most efficient. And
Any thought about having people come back to work and then work on the hybrid plan? Go back to where you were before?
I mean, we'll certainly discuss that, but right now it doesn't seem like the most efficient approach, especially right now when we're in the midst of the BA5 surge.
You stated in previous testimony, I'll change a bit of the topic, to Congress, and testimony to Congress, that the FDA intends to pay special attention to formula distribution in rural areas. Would you detail for me FDA's plans to prioritize formula distribution to rural communities?
Well, first of all, let me just say that the formula distribution is a function not just of FDA, but of the entire government, because it involves, as you know, the Department of Agriculture, HHS, and the executive branch. But the basic plan, you know, the first thing was to get production up in the U.S., then to use the enforcement discretion. I know we'll probably talk about this later with Dr. Main and Mr. Giannis, to bring in the international sources. The distribution initially was through the larger chains, and now there's an intense focus on getting to the smaller stores as quickly as possible. And that's a matter of hooking up, particularly the foreign firms that have not distributed in the U.S. before, to these smaller areas. That is one of the two areas of our major focus at this point.
Thank you. My time, too, has expired.
I would like to welcome Ranking Member Hoven, and would you be prepared to give an opening statement at this juncture?
Why, sure. I certainly can, Madam Chair. Thank you.
All right.
Welcome to our guests. Apologize for being tardy, but thank you very much for being here. Madam Chair, thanks for convening the hearing. And given the ongoing infant formula shortages, appreciate the opportunity to have a dialogue with Commissioner Califf and the rest of the panelists this morning on that issue, as well as the FDA's overall approach to food safety. You've got an extraordinary mandate. You're responsible for making sure that our nation's food and drugs are safe and effective. As you may recall, during our earlier budget hearing, I expressed concern the FDA has had 7 commissioners this past decade. During that same period, we've increased funding for FDA by 35% for the food programs. And the bulk of that is targeted to food safety and inspection improvements. Unlike other public safety agencies such as Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, this committee has provided FDA with a lot of budget flexibility as well to ensure that the highest priority needs get addressed. Additionally, it's been more than a decade since Congress enacted the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA, to update regulations regarding food production and provide FDA with additional authorities to oversee and enforce the safety of our food supply. Yet the CDC estimates that more than 128,000 people in the United States are hospitalized and 3,000 people die from foodborne illnesses each year. And it's my understanding that figure is the same as pre-FSMA implementation rates. So we need to talk about that, need to talk about what you're doing and how we can continue to work to improve it. Dr. Califf, you stated that one of your responses to the ongoing infant formula shortage is to undertake a top-to-bottom review of the food safety program, which you and I have talked about, and institute changes necessary to ensure a crisis like that doesn't happen in the future. As a parent and a grandparent, I can't overstate my concern about what happened in that regard, and we have to make sure that, we don't have something like that happen again. Going forward, I think that FDA should treat essential foods such as infant formula in the same manner the agency treats essential medicines. So, with that, again, I apologize that I was late this morning, but I want to thank you, Madam Chair, for calling this hearing, and I'll turn it back to our witnesses.
Okay. I'm going to now recognize Senator Heinrich for his questions.
Thank you, Chair Baldwin. Commissioner Califf, outside of acutely contaminated drinking water sources, people are most exposed to PFAS chemicals through the food that they eat. Food can become contaminated when it's grown, or what we've seen in New Mexico where animals drink PFAS-laden water, as well as through food packaging. And in several parts of the country, PFAS contamination has manifested in agriculture, posing a food safety risk. What is the FDA doing to regulate PFAS chemicals in our agricultural products? And does your agency have the resources it needs to successfully pursue that work?
Thank you for, so used to microphones that come on automatically. Thank you for raising this issue, and to me it exemplifies a whole host of similar issues that we have with contaminants that are there to some level. The epidemiology of this is very complicated, and it takes a lot of science to figure out where to draw the line and where to intervene in these industries that are so critical to all of our welfare. So I'll ask Dr. Main to give some of the details of what we're doing on this.
Thank you, Senator. So PFAS is a very important priority for us, not just at the FDA, but across the interagency. And we are working in partnership with all the different key interagency partners, including EPA. In terms of our role, we have multiple roles with regard to PFAS. The first one is just understanding what the dietary exposure is. We need to understand, what is the hazard and what is the exposure. So we've been conducting analyses of the U.S. food supply through what's called our Total Diet Study. In that testing, we've tested over 500 different samples. We found 10 that had detectable levels of PFAS in the general food supply. So very reassuring information with regard to the general food supply. However, of those 10 samples, 8 of them that were detectable were seafood samples. And that has led us to doing additional analyses on PFAS and potential contamination in seafood. We released some data very recently on that. So that is a key part of our work. The second part of it is when there are instances of local environmental contamination, as has occurred in your state, we work very closely with our state partners. And so we provide technical assistance. We have done analyses of samples for state partners because our analytical labs are capable of doing that. We have done that for New Mexico. And then we provide advice on what to do. This is a challenging problem. We are working with USDA, especially in the case of PFAS exposures, and EPA, so it's an important priority. The last piece is the food contact use. There are certain authorized food contact uses of PFAS. If we have a concern about safety, we take steps.
Are you largely talking about packaging in that
Yes.
case? Yeah.
Yes, I'm talking about food packaging, thank you. And so there are certain authorized uses for food contact. If we have a concern about safety, we would withdraw those authorizations, and that has happened previously. We've had a market withdrawal recently for some short-chain PFAS that we had some lack of confidence in the safety of those compounds. So those are the roles we are taking in PFAS. With regard to your question about resources, we have absorbed this work in our base budget, but we have requested new resources in the FY23 budget, and we'd be very grateful for support to increase our work in PFAS.
You mentioned the prevalence of seafood within the samples that did test positive. Do you understand the mechanism or the vector there?
Yeah, we're just early in the days of getting information about seafood contamination with PFAS. What we did was a targeted sampling assignment of 81 different seafood samples. We looked at the most commonly consumed seafood in the U.S., things like tilapia and shrimp and salmon, clams, for example. Our results were released. We'd be happy to share them with you. What we did see were some very concerning levels in one particular commodity, and that was canned clams coming in from China. So that is new data that we have. Your question about mechanism of action, we suspect this is due to environmental contamination where those clams are coming from.
Gotcha.
But we are working with the companies to try to understand that better and prevent those types of exposures.
Dr. Califf, before my time's expired, obviously it's hypercritical that families can trust infant formula to be safe. And I know you've put a lot of effort into bringing offshore formula products up to our standards. But here in the U.S., I've heard complaints of long wait times for review, for responses, for small domestic manufacturers. So what's the FDA doing to make sure its scarce resources prioritize those domestic American manufacturers and producers?
I mean, as you know, we're working 24/7 on this to make sure that we have adequate supply, and there is priority given to large quantity suppliers while we're in shortage, but we're not going to slight U.S. producers. I might ask Dr. Main to also comment, so she's running the diligent work of review.
With regard to the immediate action to try to get more formula on shelves, one of our criteria for moving forward with enforcement discretion was available product and quantity of available product, because our goal, as directed by the administration, is to get formula on shelves as quickly as possible. At the same time, one of the things that we really want to do is make sure that we have a diverse infant formula manufacturing base going forward in time. There's a really important role here for U.S. manufacturers to play. So we want to encourage U.S. domestic manufacturers. We have some under review right now for enforcement discretion, but at the same time, we're also looking beyond the current shortage, and we would like to support them in terms of providing more diversity to infant formula manufacturing in this country for a more resilient supply.
Madam Chair, can I make one more quick comment on this?
Please, Dr. Califf, go ahead.
It's just, I heard your admonition about it's not all about money and resources, but I mean, this is an area where we know we had 9 people working on this. You graciously added 4 people last year. Given the need, it's an area where just having enough people to do the work we've moved a lot of people over from other things to help make this happen now, but we can't sustain that without specific funding.
Thank you. Senator Hovind.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I guess my first question would be in regard to the infant formula situation. Now, Chairman Baldwin and I did send Dr. Califf a letter. We got that, I think, the day before yesterday, so kind of short for our staff, and they work hard and got a lot of things they have to do to get ready for these hearings. So if you could get responses sooner, it would certainly be considerate of them and their timeline as they try to get stuff ready.
I apologize for that. I wish it had gotten to you sooner. I did read the entire thing. It's a number of pages, single space. And
Pretty long, yeah.
Went into it, but I know I have the same concern myself. If people do a perfect job and it gets to me before I have a chance to read it, when I have to do something, it's not very helpful. So we'll double down on
that speech you get as you're walking on stage to give it is a little hard to review, So I know you get it, and I know you care about all the hardworking folks around here. They're trying to do good jobs. So that timeline would be helpful. But obviously, that's been a real concern. I mean, we can all imagine moms and dads, most of us having been moms and dads, in my case, grandparents, you as well, I think, sweating out trying to get that infant formula. And, the whole sequence of events from inspectors not inspecting that plant, then getting out and inspecting the plant, and then the amount of time between inspection of the plant, determination of the problem, and then leadership at FDA being made aware of it. Those are real concerns. I know in going through with our committee staff, they talked about when the saline bag, when they had the issues in the in Puerto Rico with some of the facilities down there, and there was an instantaneous effort to get after some of those medical equipment and needs and that kind of thing. I get that that's on the drug side, but, you know, something like baby formula, you're in that mode of, you know, having to have it, and in some ways almost like you would on the drug side. So how do we make certain on the food side that we've covered this, that we don't have it happen again? And then there are still shortages in the stores. Where are we there? How soon are we going to have it squared away so that, you know, we don't have the empty shelf problem?
Let's see, there was a lot included in your.
Yeah, well, I warned you last night on the phone, that was going to be my question, so not that you weren't thinking about it anyway, but.
Yeah, this is something we take so seriously for all the reasons that you gave, and I feel like I've been living with the folks you see here at the table pretty much since day one, since the recall occurred on the day I was confirmed, and I stepped right into it. They have been working night and day. First of all, you raised the question of what are we doing to correct errors that may have been made. It's well known that Dr. Steve Solomon, who runs our Center for Veterinary Medicine, has a long history of knowledge of inspections and other parts of FDA, is doing an after-action review. That's moving along. The interviews have been completed, so I'm expecting a report soon on that. We're also doing the top-to-bottom review that we announced yesterday, and Dr. Solomon's review will be available as part of that, and I'll go through item by item, all the timeline and all the things that happen and corrective action. For many of these things, like the escalation issue that you raise, we already have instituted policies. As a healthcare person, this is a very common issue in healthcare provision. Nurses, for example, if they see something wrong, escalating the issue. So I think we have already fixed that problem for the future. In terms of where we are things are getting better. I think that's pretty well known. The numbers are looking better. It's not going to be a sudden fix, but we have each of the manufacturers, both the incumbent manufacturers and also those that have now entered the market with enforcement discretion. We have their production estimates, and I'd say it's a very diversified, robust pipeline coming in, but there was a deficit that's going to take a while to fix. And there's one other issue which I think is important for people to understand, which is that when there is, in any commodity, when there's a shortage, as I've learned, I was not an expert in supply chain management in industry. When there's a shortage, people change what they make to make it so that there, for example, may be larger containers to optimize bringing forward the product for purchasing. So some of the things that people are used to seeing on the shelf may not be there, even if the total amount of formula is the same or higher than it was. The really good news, I think, is that production is exceeding buying by a significant amount now, and we expect that to continue. You may remember that there was a spike in purchasing when people became concerned. Understandably, families went out and stocked their pantries so in case there was a problem. But we've seen that now return to a normal level, even a little bit below normal level of purchasing. So that difference between what we're producing and what's being bought should be sustained now over the next few months. So I would just expect, like a plane taking off, I would expect to see a gradual improvement in the shelves.
Okay. Thank you. I guess I'll defer my additional questions now to the next round.
Next, Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Chairwoman Baldwin and Ranking Member, and I certainly appreciate our panel being here today. Sorry that I had to leave another meeting and come in, but so I'm glad that I've had the opportunity to be with you. Commissioner Califf, I want to talk about the shrimp industry. You know, Mississippi, we're a big shrimping state, and it is very important to Mississippi. And our shrimpers harvest as much as 10 million pounds of shrimp each year, and we have a lot of small, family-owned processors that they meet very high health and safety standards to deliver our delicious Gulf shrimp that we like to advertise so well on the tourism commercials and to American consumers across the country. But unfortunately, our shrimp industry is forced to compete with a lot of ever-growing volumes of the imported shrimp, so much of which is dumped on our market and subsidized by foreign governments. And more than 90% of the shrimp we consume in the U.S. is imported. You know, that's just the fact. And in many cases from countries where the food safety standards that are inferior to ours. Even more concerning is the FDA's ability or inability to adequately inspect imported shrimp to ensure these imports meet our own health and safety standards. It's no secret that drugs not approved for use in the United States are often used in foreign aquaculture operations, and that the residues of these drugs may lead to some cancer or allergic reactions when consumed by humans because of the carcinogens that are found there. I'm very pleased that imported shrimp was selected for FDA's recently launched Regulatory Partnership Pilot Program. And I hope these regulatory partnerships with exporting nations will lead to better safety compliance and oversight. But my question is, can you give us an update on the status of this pilot program and any specific improvements you have seen with respect to the regulations of imported shrimp?
Thank you, Senator, for bringing that up. I think you may be the only senator in this group that appreciates my love for shrimp and grits. I'm from a Charleston family, as evidenced by the seersucker. It's a great day to wear seersucker in the 90-plus degree weather. I think we're making great progress here, and I actually like Dr. Main and Mr. Yanis to both comment about the specifics of what's going on. I think we are making great progress here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I will say we are grateful for the resources that we have received, $6 million to help advance this work on imported shrimp and the safety of imported shrimp, and is directed in both FY21 and 22. In terms of how we've used those resources, you mentioned our regulatory partnerships. So one of the things we've done is we focused in on the countries that import the most shrimp into the United States. That includes India, Indonesia, and Ecuador, and we've been establishing regulatory partnerships with the government authorities in all three of those countries. A key part of these regulatory partnerships is also data sharing agreements, confidentiality commitments, so that we can share information that they can have about their growers, their producers. That's important for data that we can use for analytics as we look at prediction at imports and what we want to screen at imports. So that's one part of it, is the regulatory partnership piece of it. But there's more as well. In terms of what we're doing with these countries, we've also been doing training. We have actually sent some of our seafood safety experts to these countries to improve the training around seafood safety with regard to shrimp. So we've been doing that as well as the partnership agreements. The last thing I'll mention is we're using these new technologies at the border to try to identify the highest rate of violative products using data and analytics. I'll turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Yanis to discuss a little bit more about our predictive analytics using technology.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. And we understand that American consumers want their food and shrimp to be safe regardless of where it comes from. And so we're working on that, and the pilot has been very successful. Let me emphasize just a couple of things. On the regulatory partnerships, data sharing is going to be key. Can we get data from these regulatory partners and entities that they're regulating to inform our risk prioritization efforts? So we're making progress on that. One other point that I'll make before we get to our analytical approaches is we've invested some of those funds on analytical equipment. Some of these products, as you know, are aquaculture, and so there are drugs and residues that might be added, and we want to make sure that we can detect it. But I think the big thing that I'm very excited about is the use of data. Every single line of shrimp import that comes into the United States gets screened by FDA through something that we call the PREDICT system, and we're trying to leverage in this pilot work that we started earlier on a seafood AI pilot, where we're using the power of artificial intelligence and machine learning to strengthen our predictive capability of finding those violative products. And so we've embedded shrimp in the seafood AI pilot, and early results are very promising. We're on our third round of piloting, and the results suggest that we might dramatically increase our ability to find which seafood shipments, shrimp shipments are violative.
Thank you so very much for that work, and my time is up.
I want to comment on whether South Carolina shrimp is better than Mississippi shrimp, but I do have an opinion about it.
Following the subcommittee, that would be great, lunch. Senator Braun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Califf, last August, your agency entered into a memorandum of understanding with the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service to facilitate information exchange between the two entities. So there has to be, I think, ideally a communication when there's kind of dual agency responsibility. In that MOU, it requires the FDA and the FSIS to inform one another in the case of outbreaks, adverse cases of adulteration or mislabeling, infestations, etc. Now, 11 months into this MOU, is the FDA planning to conduct a public critical review for its actual implementation?
Senator Braun, I'm sure that'll be part of the top to bottom review that we announced yesterday. I know this is within Mr. Giannis's portfolio, the relationships with the other agencies, so I might ask him to comment.
The answer is yes. We work almost on a daily basis with USDA on this shared issue, and so there's regular conversations, and so the answer is yes. We're closely evaluating how we're going to work through these processes together, and we're making progress.
And do you think the FDA has done its part in being a co-equal partner and trying to pursue and discuss these issues?
Absolutely, yeah. We've signed an MOU with the identification of roles and responsibilities, and I can tell you we've done our part, and my sense is that USDA will tell you that they're very happy with the role we play.
Very good. This is on a different topic. Dr. Califf, last year we suffered a record high of 100,000 opioid overdose deaths. As a result, Senator Manchin and I sent a letter to you in April urging that you implement recommendations from the national academies to improve the FDA's policies for addressing this epidemic. A report that I think you requested during your first stint at the FDA. I know that was a critical part of the questioning when you went through the process of heading the FDA. Have we taken meaningful steps to do something about it? I know that yesterday Manchin and I co-sponsored changing the culture of the FDA Act to kind of prod into something that looks like it's being taken more seriously, and love to hear your comments on where we're at there, because it doesn't look like it's getting any better.
I would say in terms of mortality rate from overdose, it's not getting better. And in fact, CDC yesterday reported that it's gotten worse. And so this is something from day one when I came in, we've been working on it. And my personal energy, I will say, got diverted a bit to infant formula. But in a very short period of time, during the summer, we're going to come out with a statement about the things that we're doing in this regard. There is a lot underway of the parts of it that are in our bailiwick, in our control, including the promised review of the past. And I don't think you solve future problems just by looking at the past, but you can learn things from the past that you need to take into account. You may have noticed yesterday, Dr. Sokolowski was promoted into a joint role between the drug part of the FDA and the Commissioner's office to head up this part of the effort. So we have a whole team working on it. One of the things that's really difficult and frustrating about this is that in our list of things to do, almost every one of them involves interaction with some other entity that has some say or control over it. And I'll just point to over-the-counter naloxone as an example of something that's very complicated, because the cost may actually go up when you go over the counter in that situation to the person that needs it. But we have approaches to that we're going to put forward. Also, just want to call attention to the big new thing that's happening that we'd better all pay attention to is the essentially mail-order high-dose chemically synthesized fentanyl and methamphetamine coming in by the mail, direct delivery to people that's killing some of our most promising students who think they're getting Adderall or something to help them study. This is different. The things that we've worked on in the past are not going to solve this part of it, so we got to work on that too.
So we're out of time here, and you said during the summer. This is the summer, so when can we expect that to be out there for us and the public to see?
Yeah, I can't give you an exact date other than to say it's within the summer, and I know you're all over
Take
this,
that
so
by
the sooner the
September
better.
21st then.
No,
we need
no.
it.
I think of it as a I don't know, the way I grew up, I think of the summer, not officially, but more like September, 1st of September.
Labor Day, okay, well, that's even better. Look forward to seeing it. Thank you.
I'm going to begin a second round of questions, and want to make sure I ultimately involve all the panelists in questions. But so, Mr. Yanis, you have prior experience working outside of the FDA with major food corporations. Can you discuss, and I know this top-to-bottom review is ongoing or is just commencing, but can you discuss what changes you view need to occur to make food safety more of a priority at the agency? And do you think that the agency is too slow to respond to outbreaks of foodborne illnesses?
Well, thank you for those questions. Let me take the first one at the top. Yes, I'm very fortunate to have worked for 30 years in two organizations that are world-class, I would say, large global footprints. And I've learned a lot in those experiences. But I did come to FDA a few years ago to try to make a difference in the public sector serving the American people, who ultimately I think we all agree are our bosses, the American public. And so, but a couple of the best practices that I've learned working for these world-class organizations I think are appropriate at FDA. Let me give you three real quickly. Number one is that food safety is a priority at FDA, but I think we have to go beyond making it a priority and making it part of the culture. It's really has to be an unwavering commitment that we're going to do everything that we can to ensure that Americans have safe food. In the organizations that I work for, the reason they were great, really it was their cultures. And I know sometimes people think that's the soft stuff, but it is the hard stuff. It's got to be part of the organization's DNA. Number two, the organizations that I work for were just, I would say, ruthlessly committed to continuous improvement, modernization, and reinvention. You know, one went from being non-existent to the world's largest company, Fortune 1 in 50 years. How did they do that? Because they constantly reinvented what they do. And at FDA, we're trying to do that under the auspices of something we've launched during my tenure called the New Era of Smarter Food Safety. It's this idea that we're living in modern times and we're going to need more modern approaches to how we regulate food. And so that's a second thing that I think good companies do well, those companies that go from good to great, and at FDA we're committed to continued modernization, and I'd love to tell you more about New Era. But the last thing I would say is those organizations do a really good job of setting very high performance expectations, having high expectation standards of themselves, just like this conversation we're having here. We appreciate that you have high expectations of us. We have high expectations too. They do a brilliant job of clarifying roles and responsibilities, so that when you work as a team, there's no duplication of effort and you get more done. And I would say the other thing the private sector does really well is the use of performance measures and metrics. They measure everything, leading indicators and lagging indicators. And I know it's something that Dr. Califf really wants to do is really leverage data and measurements. We're doing all of these things, but clearly there's more that we can do. In terms of the question, and it's a good question, do I think we're too slow in responding to outbreaks? I certainly think there's more we can do. Responding to foodborne outbreaks fast and thoroughly is critical. The faster you respond, the quicker you can pull contaminated products off of the market and protect others from getting ill. And we have to do a better job of understanding the root cause. Why did the outbreak happen in the first place? So you could prevent it from happening again. We've publicly stated we think we can do more and we can go faster, but let me give you just two quick examples of areas where we've improved. When I first arrived at FDA 3 years ago, there was quite a bit of criticism that we were too slow arriving to, let's say, a field, a farm, or a site after an outbreak. I can tell you that now we generally show up quickly in as fast as 24 hours or shortly thereafter. When I arrived, there was criticisms that when these outbreaks happened, the outbreak reports were too slow if they ever came, so that the industry could learn from them. I can tell you we've doubled, nearly tripled the number of outbreak investigation reports that we now publish, so industry knows what happens. And we've issued some as quickly as 6 weeks after the CDC has declared the outbreak over. Now, that's fast. Having stated that, there's more than we can do, and in December, under the auspices of our new era of smarter food safety, we published a report that we're calling the Foodborne Outbreak Response and Improvement Plan. We contracted with the University of Minnesota School of Public Health. They worked with other federal partners and did a review of our outbreak investigation procedures, and we published a plan on how we further intend to improve how quickly and thoroughly we respond. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. We know that the Office of Regulatory Affairs at FDA has vast responsibility for overseeing inspections and enforcement of FDA regulations. One criticism that we have heard is that FDA is too slow, that the agency is stuck with outdated ways of thinking and is not nimble to keep up with modern trends. So, Mr. Rogers, how do you respond to those sort of criticisms?
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, I think we have demonstrated the ability to be nimble, especially in response to foodborne outbreaks and emergencies. As Deputy Commissioner Yanis mentioned, we have on many occasions in response to an emergency been able to get boots on the ground within 24 hours on the farm and in the facility. I can say that we are an organization that is committed to continuous improvement. We certainly welcome any feedback that would help us better achieve our public health mission, and we certainly will react to the recommendations that are part of the ongoing internal review.
I am going to suspend the second round so we can give Senator Tester his first round of questions.
God, thank you, Madam Chair. Anytime I can come in front of Moran, that's a good day. Tell you, that's, I know. Well, first of all, welcome to you all. Dr. Califf, it's good to have you in front of the committee. It's good to see you got confirmed. I like all that, okay? You are a cardiologist, which means you're a doctor, which means you should know medicine, and you know probably better than anybody that the cost of medicine as part of the family's budget has increased significantly over the last few decades. That's the bad news for the budget. The good news for the budget is the price of food is decreased as far as the overall amount put out for this. It's due to a lot of good science, quite honestly, developing hybrid plants that people like me, who's a farmer, depend upon. But the truth is I don't know that we're doing enough to find out if the food we eat is still medicine, which food is medicine. And I think you would agree on that. You eat good food, you usually have better health outcomes. There's a lot of information out there about people's allergies to wheat and their ability to not eat it, which, by the way, is the staff of life. The question is the FDA or is there anybody doing research on the work that man has done to modify plants, to make them so they produce higher protein and bigger yields to be able to feed the world, which are all noble causes. But they're not so noble if they don't reduce inflammation, if they don't, if they're not good for you. And one of your predecessors, and I think I told you this when I brought them in and asked them this question, they said, wheat's wheat, we don't need to do any research on wheat because wheat is wheat, regardless whether it's been genetically modified or hybridized or anything. I'm not arguing against any of that because, quite frankly, I've profited from that good science. But the bottom line is anybody doing any research to make sure what people are eating actually is making them healthier in the area of the plants that have been hybridized?
I really appreciate you bringing this up. I mean, this gets into the area of precision nutrition, in my view, which is a great topic. Dr. Main is a world's authority in this area. Let me just say, in my opening statement, I made the point, we now as Americans live 5 years shorter than the average of other high-income countries. And the foundation of good health is a good diet and not using tobacco products. So that combination.
That cuts me out on both, but go ahead.
So, then the question is, what's a good diet? And what's a good diet for an individual? And what are the constituents of the diet that make a difference? And with our change to a digital world of data, there's so much more that we can do. So, Dr. Main, you may want to address that.
So thank you, Senator Tester. So a couple comments. First of all, from an FDA perspective with regard to genetically engineered crops or gene-edited crops, we do play an important role through our biotech notification program. So we look at the types of changes that are being intentionally made to these crops for very important characteristics. For example, drought resistance, resistance to viruses, improved nutrient levels. Those are the types of innovations that we are seeing. So our job is to make sure that those crops, when they're introduced into the market, are safe and that they are appropriately labeled.
So how do you do that? And I'm not only talking about GMOs. I'm actually even talking about hybridized. It's been around my lifetime, my entire lifetime. Yeah. So how do you actually test to see, for example, Turkey Red, which is a wheat that was my grandfather raised when he homesteaded the farm, actually reduces inflammation, or at least I've been told that, okay, by people who are smart. And I've been told, by the way, that some of the wheats that we raise that are very, very common now don't do that. That seems to me to add to costs, and people eat wheat because they think it's good for you, and I'm one of those people that think it's good for me because I eat a lot of it. Is there anybody that does any research to say, yeah, you know what, Q7431, developed by whatever university you want to see, really doesn't have those inflammation reduction qualities?
Yeah, so I guess how I would respond is with regard to traditionally bred hybrid types of crops.
Yes.
That type of research would be done primarily out of USDA, working with the federal agencies. So when it comes to basic science research, health research, USDA and NIH are critical partners.
So is that done because Congress wants USDA to do it? Because USDA ain't gonna, that dog ain't gonna hunt in USDA. I'm just telling you, there's no way. They got other stuff that they're doing. Why isn't FDA doing? I mean, you guys, it's Food Administration. We'll leave drugs out. Food Administration.
Yes. How I would respond is we do not have a significant budget to support things like extramural research.
So you need more money.
If we were to take on a mission like that, we are not resourced to do that.
And if I might, Madam Chair, and then I'll shut up. Might I ask, if you had the money to do it, do you think that the science community would try to stop you from doing that research?
We always follow the science on anything that we do.
Okay, but remember, the science is disease-resistant, drought-resistant, bug-resistant, all good things, by the way, all stuff that I applaud as a farmer when I put it in the ground. But on the other side, if it doesn't produce the kind of food effects that you want, and nobody's testing it, don't you think people get a little bit nervous if you started testing for this, for the food, nutrition, qualities?
When it comes to, again, the genetically engineered gene-edited ones, if they are improving nutrient content, we require evidence of that when we are looking at those types of submissions. But we don't review the regular crops.
Can I make a
And I don't want to beat
comment?
this dog to death, but nutrient qualities is one thing, healthcare benefits are, I think, another.
You showed a lot, in my opinion, you showed a lot of wisdom there, Senator. You sound like a researcher. If I could make one quick comment about this, and I think Dr. Main agrees with me on this, nutritional research needs to be an all-of-government effort. I mean, to leave out the NIH would be a big mistake. To not involve USDA would be a big mistake. I think FDA should have a bigger role. We got a lot of expertise, and we understand health effects. I mean, the point you made about measuring just inflammation, not the overall health effect, is a really important one. And we couldn't even address this until recently because we didn't have the big data capabilities that we now have to study populations. I'll call your attention to a White House conference coming up in September, where all the players are going to be at the table. I would urge you to get your say in because I think you're saying the right thing.
You're very kind. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Do you have a second round of questions, Senator Moran?
Yes, although I hate to follow Senator Tester. Thank you, Chairman Baldwin. Dr. Califf, it currently takes 3 to 5 years for a new animal feed ingredient to be approved. In fiscal year 20, I worked to secure an additional $5 million for FDA to hire additional personnel to review feed ingredient approvals. In fiscal year 2022, Congress provided another $1 million increase to improve or attempt to improve this process. Since receiving those additional resources, what steps has FDA taken to improve timeliness of reviewing and approving animal ingredients? And then when you answer that question, then I want to flag a policy concern I have in that process.
Well, you know, the additional funding has been appreciated. I know that Dr. Solomon and CBM have worked really hard to speed up the process and do the evaluations that are needed. But I think the Center for Veterinary Medicine is the most underappreciated part of the FDA. So I mean, oversight is good, support is good, and we, you know, I'll have to go back and talk with Dr. Solomon to get a more detailed answer, but do appreciate the question.
If you'd ask him to contact me or my staff, that'd be wonderful.
We'll do it.
The follow-up to that is a policy concern with the approval process. The livestock industry is looking to offer solutions to meet the challenges related to climate. However, the current FDA policy interpretations regulate certain feed ingredients which could reduce greenhouse gas emissions as animal drugs instead of as a feed ingredient. It's my understanding that the FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine policy manual dictating these decisions has not been updated since 1998. Would you commit to reviewing those policies related to categorizing feed ingredients as animal drugs and working with me to improve the approval process so our livestock producers can get these climate solutions available in a more timely fashion?
I know there's several issues in that category, so I'm definitely committed to reviewing it. The impact on emissions has got to be an important consideration in that overall picture. So the short answer is yes.
Thank you, Doctor.
All right, Senator Hoeven.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Dr. Califf, you mentioned the top to bottom review. When do you expect it to begin? And then I trust you'll be sharing it with Congress as well, correct?
I think a lot of people are going to be watching this, and you know, in an interview I did yesterday, I pointed out that we have a lot of bosses. Mr. Yanis said the public. I agree with that. You guys are our bosses. We can't make the kind of changes we're going to need without your agreement. So I don't see it as just informing you. I think we're going to have to iterate about what we're finding and what you believe. And we're also part of the executive branch, so we got a lot of masters there that we have to satisfy. We're going to start as soon as we get the contracting done. You know, the people that do the work are going to put a lot of time and effort into it. So we're working on that right now through the Reagan-Udall Foundation, and then we're committed to having a report within 60 business days of the time that the work begins.
Okay, thank you. Budget transparency. Also, I brought up the Food Safety Modernization Act and both performance before and after. Can you incorporate into your budgeting process or reporting process how you are trying to implement that flexibility and improve your processes? Will that be part of this review as well?
Short answer is yes. I will say I've worked in just about every kind of organization. The federal agency budgets, I would say, are among the more difficult to decipher because of the mixed mission and sort of all these things come into play. But I think on the food side, you know, one thing about the user fees on the medical product side is it brings a discipline to the budget that's very clear, which has some value. We don't have that on the food side. But we are committed to making the budget much more transparent and understandable.
So, Mr. Yanis, and I know I talked to Dr. Califf about this as well. I know you're trying to use technology to create a safer food supply, a more traceable food supply, and all that kind of thing. you've worked with large companies. I certainly understand how they can implement the IT to do that kind of thing. But there's a lot of small companies out there. How are they going to be part of this effort? I mean, and it seems like a very worthy effort, but how are they going to have the resource base to do this?
Well, thank you for that question, and you're right. We have to be very cognitive of this. You've acknowledged we want to use technologies such as machine learning to strengthen our predictive capabilities. We have an interest in leveraging technologies such as distributed ledger to see if we can track and trace foods faster. But we have to be cognitive and very careful of what we ask or require of the industries that we regulate. And so we're taking that into consideration. Let me give you one quick example of how we're doing that. I think many of you know we have a proposed food traceability out. When we issued that proposed food traceability rule, it was just for certain foods that are most likely to be involved in foodborne outbreaks, number one. Number two, when we proposed the rule, we said that the records can be kept for each node in the system, not for the entire continuum, but for each node, and it can be kept on paper. So we're not requiring that it be kept digitally. We've carved out exemptions for small food producers and for small retailers. And so we're being cognitive. We do know that some in the food industry, as the food industry becomes increasingly digitized, because it's happening, it hasn't happened real quickly as it's happened in other industries because of the margins in food. But it's going to happen because it drives efficiencies. As that happens, we have to be careful that we don't create what I call a digital divide. And so one of the things we did just last year, we did something that was a little bit less traditional. We didn't write rules, we didn't write guidance, but we held what we called a food traceability challenge, and we called it a low to no cost food traceability challenge. Let me emphasize it was low to no cost. We know that data can be digitized. We've been digitizing data for decades. But we went out to food traceability solution providers and we said, can you create solutions that are low to no cost so they can scale for food producers at all sizes? And our call to action was answered in a big way. We had over 90 submissions representing 12 countries around the world. We've selected winners. And a lot of the solutions are low to no cost. If you think about social media platforms, many of us are in them. How much do you pay to participate? Most of us, none, because they've created economic models that allow those solutions to scale. And so rest assured that we're very careful of this, and we won't require something on food producers that's not doable, and we'll make sure that our food safety policies and rules are sustainable and that they can be executed by food producers of all sizes.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that answer. Clearly, something you've been thinking about, and that's
Yes, sir.
good. Dr. Califf, this relates a little bit to what you're talking to Tester about, but there are 21 federal agencies that all have different programs, standards, requirements, recommendations, suggestions, I mean, you name it, but they all want to kind of tell you how you ought to improve your diet to make you more healthy, okay? Well, that can create a lot of challenges out there for a lot of folks, like school nutritionists, for example, who I think know quite a bit about nutrition and what those school children should eat, will eat, won't eat. And sometimes all these, mandates from on high where somebody just knows how all 300+ million folks ought to eat every day, create some real challenges out there. As lead agency on food safety, how do you kind of weigh in on that and kind of rationalize the thing in a way that works for consumers and for the folks, the professionals out there that are trying to do it, but you still got to give people choice and discretion. And, they might want to eat Mississippi shrimp or they might want to eat South Carolina shrimp. And so they should be informed, but they should also have their choice.
I'm going to turn to Dr. Main, but let me just say, she and I remember going back 2015, have arguments about this on the scientific basis of how you derive the conclusions that you need to derive. Because you could write a book about just about any diet now and sell it to a lot of people. Might not be good for any of them, but Dr. Main is in charge of this. The food labeling effort is just an amazing. I just think of it in my lectures between my stints at FDA. I said, you got a space about this big to inform 320 million people who speak different languages and have different levels of education. It's a big task.
Yeah.
So I'd say we are very committed to doing what you just said, which is empowering consumers with information. We want consumers to have the information they need to make those types of choices. And labeling is a key tool, and you mentioned 21 federal agencies, but only a few of them are regulatory, like FDA. And so we do have some unique levers to really help empower consumers with information. So that's a key part of what we do. In terms of consumer choice, we agree with consumer choice. We're trying to support innovation throughout the food supply, but to make sure those products are safe and then they're properly labeled so consumers do have those choices. In terms of the foundation of dietary recommendations, that is the dietary guidelines process. That is a joint process that is done every 5 years. It's a partnership between the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Health and Human Services. We do play a role in that as part of HHS, but all the federal dietary guidance derives from the dietary guidelines process that occurs every 5 years.
How about standards of identity? In one case, there's one that dates back to 1988. How are we making sure that these standards of identity are those decisions are being made, they're being made well, and they're being made more timely?
Thank you for that. Should I take that one?
Please.
Yes, thank you for that question.
My next one's going to be Mississippi and South Carolina shrimp, so it's going to get tougher after this one, too.
Yeah. There are a large number of standards of identity. Some of them definitely need to be updated, and we have some petitions that we've been working our way through, and we are very committed to updating, modernizing standards of identity, and where appropriate, creating new standards of identity. We have some requests to create new standards of identity, for example. But one of the challenges with regard to standards of identity, it is not designed to be an agile process. This process to update a standard of identity involves rulemaking, and rulemaking always takes time. Mm-hmm. And with certain standards of identity, it involves formal rulemaking, which is in some ways an even more complicated process. So it's not a quick process. The other piece is, as we work to update a standard of identity, it's really critical that we have extensive stakeholder engagement to understand the practices that are used by the folks who are making those standardized foods so that the modernized standard of identity really reflects what's in there. So we are very committed to doing that. We are making progress on that. We appreciate new resources that we have received from you all.
Provided, yep.
Yes, this has been a very under-resourced area in CFSAN, one of the most under-resourced in the past, and that created a backlog, like the 1988 one that you mentioned. But with the new resources, we've been able to hire 13 new people. We have 5 new recruits that we are working to get through the process. I will mention that the Foods Program does not have the Cures hiring authority that is as agile as the medical product, so it takes us longer to get those new hires on board. So we know we've had conversations with many of you about hiring authorities that the medical product centers have. If the Foods Program had those same hiring authorities, your resources would translate into bodies on board more quickly in the Foods
I
Program.
appreciate that. That's a good recommendation, and I'm glad you brought up the additional funding. I was going to do it. You did. Good for you. The flexibility hiring authority is something that we should look into. I appreciate that recommendation. This is a challenging area. I'm sure that the chairman can tell you, for example, milk products, So, but a very important area. So thank you for your response.
Thank you. I want to share my gratitude with all the witnesses from FDA. I think we had a good discussion, and I want to assure you that the committee is here to support you in the important work you do. I am now going to dismiss this panel and invite the second panel to come forward. And I will be introducing them as that transition is taking place. So you are excused, and thank you again for appearing. I want to welcome our second panel. Mr. Brian Ronholm is the Director of Food Policy at Consumer Reports. Brian leads Consumer Reports advocacy efforts with regard to food safety. He was previously a Deputy Undersecretary for Food Safety at USDA and also served as an Agriculture Appropriations Associate for Representative Rosa DeLauro. Ms. Sarah Gallo is the Vice President of Product Policy at Consumer Brands Association. In her role, she oversees the consumer brands regulation issues from advocacy through education. She has also served as Vice President of Agriculture and Environment for the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, otherwise known as BIO. These witnesses bring years of experience and expertise, and we are looking forward to hearing from both of you today. So, if I've given you enough time to get settled, I will start with Ms. Gallo.
Plenty of time to get settled. Thank you, Senator. Chairwoman Baldwin, Ranking Member Hoeven, and other members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to testify today. As you noted, my name is Sarah Gallo, and I serve as Vice President of Product Policy for the Consumer Brands Association. Consumer Brands champions the industry whose products Americans depend on every day, representing more than 2,000 iconic brands. From cleaning and personal care to food and beverage products, the consumer packaged goods industry plays a vital role in powering the U.S. economy, contributing $2 trillion to U.S. GDP and supporting more than 20 million American jobs. The CPG industry depends on FDA to perform its regulatory role effectively, efficiently, and transparently. As we look to the future of our industry, modernizing and reforming FDA is top of mind for food, beverage, and personal care companies that we represent. And their experiences provide real-world evidence of why a modernized FDA is warranted. Consumer Brands is calling on FDA to unify its food program under a Deputy Commissioner for Foods, with accountability to the Commissioner and direct line authority over CFSAN, CVM, and the food-related components and operations of ORA. The lack of a single, full-time, fully empowered expert leader affects all aspects of the FDA's food program. Inefficient decision-making has slowed reviews, hindering progress and even rendering innovation obsolete. Inexperienced and undertrained inspectors are being sent into the field. A split and siloed food program undercuts communication and collaboration. There is an urgent need for this change to be made, and the appointee should have relevant and appropriate food credentials to quickly implement modifications that will benefit consumers and our industry. A unified structure and a full-time senior leader translates into results we all care about: focused leadership, accountability, and effective dialogue with myriad stakeholders. And FDA can make this change now. The creation of a Deputy Commissioner for Foods does not require an act of Congress or rulemaking. In fact, the position existed under the Obama administration and worked to ensure programs and oversight worked at optimal levels. We know that FDA's food program may require increased funding to fulfill this mission. We also appreciate that Congress has provided considerable funding going back to fiscal year 2015. A strategic review and realignment around priorities could help FDA and its stakeholders make the case for additional funding if needed. Organizing under a Deputy Commissioner for Food is step one, but it's not the only step. Consumer Brands set a goal to define a series of high-value, product-related policies that reframe FDA's food operations. A decade ago, we would have thought about modernizing FDA to move at the speed of business. But years later, it's essential that FDA is reformed to move at the speed of the consumer, meeting their rapidly changing preferences and demands. We are in the progress of articulating these policies with our member companies and look forward to sharing our plan with you in the coming months. Modernizing the agency also should be business critical for the agency. Reforms stand to position FDA as a leader and a subject matter expert in facilitating innovation, assisting industry to meet state mandates, and enabling data to drive decision-making. Consumer Brands calls on FDA to convene an independent outside panel of experts to address modernization of food program policy and operations. Finally, I would note that the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrates that regulators like FDA and industry can work together to improve the regulatory environment. I'll note a few policies that worked during the pandemic and that continue to work in today's operating environment. First, incorporating remote regulatory assessments in modernized inspection approaches has the potential to save hours or even days' worth of time for companies, as well as for government agencies and departments. Second, a process for quickly creating just-in-time industry best practice documents, clearing them, and subsequently sharing them with appropriate federal and state government agencies, and then posting to a website should be the new normal, and the federal government should partner with industry to achieve this goal. Labeling flexibilities provided by the FDA during the pandemic to address those persistent supply chain challenges were critical to the CPG industry's ability to deliver essentials to consumers, particularly when they were homebound. These flexibilities make supply chains more nimble, allowing us to better navigate shortages while ensuring consumer safety. Working at the speed of the consumer requires a strong, modernized FDA, one that is structured, governed, and funded for success. That might not be the case today, but it also doesn't need to be the fate of tomorrow if FDA chooses to make smart, needed changes. We look forward to working with the committee to achieve this goal, and I look forward to your questions and appreciate the opportunity to present our perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gallo. Next, we will hear from Mr. Ronholm.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Hoven. I know my written testimony is in the record, but I'll just take a moment to make some brief comments. And I know during his testimony today, Dr. Califf made a couple mentions of the top and bottom reviews that will be conducted as part of their process. And I would just point that the critical points to these top to bottom reviews are, as Sarah alluded to, independent and transparent. And yesterday's announcement about the Reagan-Udall Foundation conducting the evaluation is an interesting development that will deserve monitoring. Given that the purpose of the foundation is to support the FDA's mission, we certainly are eager to learn more details about how the foundation will ensure that that process is independent. And we're also eager to learn more about how the foundation will ensure the transparency of their process and how they intend to engage with internal stakeholders within FDA, particularly CFSAN, CVM, ORA, those offices, and also how they intend to engage with external stakeholders, consumer groups, industry, state and local regulators. I think having as much input as possible throughout this process will be critical to their process and conducting a true comprehensive top to bottom review. And I know a coalition of groups, including Consumer Grants and Consumer Reports, are certainly looking forward to working with the foundation throughout that process to resolve the concerns. And it's those concerns that link to my testimony, which focuses on how the structure, governance, and performance of the food program impacts recalls and food policy decisions. Between inadequate responses to recalls, a failure to implement a culture of illness prevention, and a failure to move quickly on proposed rules and initiatives, there are a number of questions about whether the FDA is performing its regulatory role effectively. It's struggling in its role to protect consumers, and it's preventing the food industry from operating effectively. The recent infant formula crisis was merely one symptom that exposed a greater organizational structure and culture problem, and it's clear that the confidence in the food program is eroding. A big reason for the lower confidence is that the food program has second-class status within FDA, and it's resulted in serious problems. The FDA also lacks a single full-time, fully empowered expert leader to provide strategic leadership and management accountability to a set of offices that are responsible for approximately 80% of the food supply. It's a fragmented structure in the food program that led an unprecedented coalition of consumer groups, industry trade associations, and state and local regulators to join together to call on FDA to unify the food program under a deputy commissioner for foods, and this is what Sarah alluded to in her testimony. This position would have accountability to the commissioner and direct oversight authority over CFSAN, CVM, and the food-related operations of ORA. That would bring focused leadership and accountability to the food program at the agency. The current framework often results in an overall lack of urgency in making compliance decisions, including recalls, and an aggressive lack of ambition on policy initiatives. Another area where there are serious questions, and certainly appropriate to this subcommittee, is how funding is allocated within the food program. ORA, which is responsible for inspections and compliance, receives approximately 70% of all FDA food program funding. And despite the funding increases that the FDA has received post-FSMA, we've seen inspections decline in the years following the enactment of FSMA and even before the pandemic shutdown. So while there is general agreement among stakeholder groups for the need for increased funding for the food program at the agency, it should come with more accountability and more transparency. Unlike those other programs at FDA, FDA co-regulates food safety with state and local programs. These programs have had funding capped in recent years. ORA also significantly reduced FDA-funded state inspections, which can be conducted at a lower cost. Meanwhile, ORA is seeking to count state inspections conducted without federal funding towards its FSMA mandate. The success of the food program overall requires a full-time, empowered expert leader who could lead culture change and ensure accountability for resource management. We're fortunate to have a person with immense expertise and abilities like Dr. Califf serving as FDA Commissioner. His assertions about investing in technology to leverage oversight activities certainly make sense. However, investing in technologies and implementing structural changes for improved governance are not mutually exclusive opportunities. We're not going to algorithm our way out of the existing problems in the food program. We also need structural and governance changes, stronger leadership, and a higher priority that puts food and nutrition policy at the same level at the agency with drugs, devices, biologics, and tobacco. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I would like to start by asking Ms. Gallo about how your member companies interact with the FDA and how you believe those interactions can be improved. And then I want to get more specific about how during this top-to-bottom review you would like to see that input take place.
Thank you, Senator. Also used to microphones that turn on, like the Commissioner. I would say, to start off, it's absolutely critical that industry and FDA have a predictable and functional working relationship. We want and need the regulatory system to be successful in order to provide a safe food supply. And certainly our industry's interest is making a more productive agency that serves consumers. And a key component of that is a food program that speaks with one voice. We appreciate when the agency reaches out proactively, but that really does need to become the new norm. And I think you heard many of the FDA officials note stakeholder engagement and the importance of stakeholder engagement, and we entirely concur with that. We would like to see an agency that is less siloed and less fragmented. Industry needs that unified foods program to provide a strategic and proactive regulatory agenda. And again, improving stakeholder engagement. In addition to rulemaking, there are certainly other ways that the industry can meaningfully engage with FDA, like industry roundtables, or even other discussions that I think could inform FDA's actions in real time. As it relates to the top to bottom down review, certainly we welcomed that announcement from FDA yesterday and are encouraged that they're aligned in our thinking that there needs to be a holistic evaluation of what's going on there and how modernization could occur. And like Brian referenced, I think we'll be watching very closely the scope of that. There were aspects of the food program that were not specifically named, CVM being one of them, as what's on the radar to look at from that top to bottom. So we'll be watching that and look forward to informing or sharing that information however we can.
I would ask pretty much the same question to Mr. Ronholm. You said in your testimony how important it would be for this review to be truly independent, certainly add in accountability and transparency. How would you characterize an adequate amount of input, and how would you like to see that take place? And if you want to amplify anything about your concern about the foundation maintaining its independence, please do.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of how this process plays out, it's absolutely critical to have that internal engagement at the agency to ensure that all aspects of the food program are being considered as part of this discussion. So that entails, obviously, ORA, you have CFSAN, CVM, as Sarah mentioned, and, the Office of Food Policy and Response, which is Frank Giannis's shop. I think incorporating those key officials in all of those offices as part of those internal engagement as part of that process, I think ensures transparency, it ensures the independence, it ensures that all aspects of this issue get considered and discussed. From the external standpoint, certainly, as Dr. Califf alluded to, there's a lot of noise, a lot of groups involved in this issue from a wide variety of consumer groups, industry trade associations, state and local regulators. We all want FDA to succeed. We all want the food program to succeed, and we all have a key seat at the table. So to be able to incorporate those critical external stakeholders as part of that discussion, I think really enhances the recommendations that come out of it.
Very good. Senator Hoven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank both the witnesses for being here and note that you both included in your comments recommendations that the Deputy Commissioner for Foods be restored in terms of the management at FDA. And I guess what I'd like to get your thoughts on, in both from both of you, is the need for additional hiring authorities that FDA has requested in their budget submission. And so if you could each kind of address that, I would appreciate it.
I'd be happy to start, Senator. Thank you. I would say we certainly agree that there is a need to fill vacancies with qualified people more quickly, and I think the examples that were given around the inspection force are certainly ringing true for our members as well. So we would support efforts to permit FDA to do that. I'd also just mention while you're asking, because this generally gets to some budget questions, and both Brian and I have referenced that in order for us to feel more comfortable going in and advocating, we do think that there needs to be more transparency around the way that FDA has used the funds that you all have appropriated to the agency. I think that level of transparency will give us a lot of confidence in looking at priorities and seeing how they want to move forward. But as far as FDA's ability and helping them with the ability to get more qualified individuals out into the field, that is something that we would support.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think I can add much to that. We certainly support looking at flexible hiring authorities. I know Dr. Main had mentioned, and Dr. Califf as well, that they have trouble with maintaining qualified expert staff on board. So certainly looking at giving them more flexibility to hire these experts, especially inspectors from the ORA standpoint, I think certainly would be helpful in consumer protection and outbreak response. And to Sarah's point, when you link that with additional transparency, I think it makes for a better system for sure.
Okay. Thank you very much. No further questions, Madam Chair.
All right, I can wrap up with an additional question. Both of you pointed to the need for a deputy commissioner. I'd like to hear a little bit more amplification and detail on how you believe a deputy commissioner for foods would improve food safety overall, but also improve accountability. And so start with Ms. Gallo.
Thank you, Senator. So I'm glad you asked, because I think one thing that we haven't said today, and it seems rather obvious, but I think it's a good point, is that not having a single entity overseeing all of those makes it really hard to connect the dots at what's happening at FDA. At this time, we're certainly, as was in our testimony, calling on FDA to appoint that deputy commissioner, one, because they have the authority to do so right now. So that's not something that we have to wait on a very laborious process to do. So having the ability to do that and get the modernization or just that general transparency and better collaboration started is something that we are strongly encouraging the agency to think about. We certainly know that having a single person that can look and make sure that the subject matter experts are in line with the inspection force and connecting those dots, I think just really helps the agency speak with one voice. It helps them externally present that unified agenda that makes businesses able to operate more efficiently and to better meet the needs of consumers. And I think it helps with consumer communication and consumer expectation. If consumers can see that there's a person overseeing all aspects of a food program, I think that inherently gives a lot of confidence in the ability to know what's in the food supply, feel safe about the food supply, and also that we can bring innovative products to markets to meet the consumer demand.
And I would just add to that, that a big piece of this in having an empowered deputy commissioner position is it would bring that focused leadership and accountability that the food program desperately needs. As you all know, the FDA commissioners throughout the past few decades have specialized in are medical professionals. And so naturally their focus is on pharmaceutical products, medical products, and certainly that has a big impact on public health, and the pandemic is a good example of that needed focus. But what ends up happening is there's this intense competition for the time of the commissioner as it relates to food. And so what ends up happening is that food gets pushed to the back burner a lot of the times and obtains that kind of second-class status. So when you have that kind of fragmented structure, like you saw today, in that there's various people that report directly to the commissioner. You have Mr. Yanis reporting directly to the commissioner, Dr. Main, Mr. Rogers, they all report directly to the commissioner, and they all have some say in food programs. So when you kind of have those fragmented voices all having, they're not strategically aligned with an agenda, and that's how you end up with a situation where it's fragmented, that impacts response, outbreaks, it impacts policy development as well.
I want to thank both of you for being here today, and very good compliment to the first panel. So I appreciate that. And I look forward to working with you in the future as we tackle these complex issues. For the benefit of subcommittee members, questions for the record are due within 1 week. And for all of our witnesses, panel 1 and panel 2, we'd appreciate responses to questions for the record within 4 weeks. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.